my level of learning today is much higher than it was when I left Yeshiva, right? So, and then I have a lot of kaverim like that also, right? So it's definitely achievable.
Shalom Aleichem, and welcome to Shark Tank, the podcast about the challenges and opportunities of being a Ben Torah in the workforce. This week, we sit down with Steve Glanz. Steve climbed the ladder in the Israeli tech scene, but then he did something that most people can only dream of: exit. He started his own company and hit the jackpot when he was acquired by Oracle. But what happened next will probably surprise you. My name is Yaakov Wolf, and this is Shark Tank. Okay, Steve Glanz, welcome to Shark Tank. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So we've known each other for quite a while, and you had some very wonderful roles in the tech world as an executive level in the Israeli tech scene. And then you made a big jump. You became an entrepreneur. You started your own company. So can you tell us a little bit about that transition? What made you take that move?
Yeah, sure. So I think in general, I guess a bit of a risk taker. So, when I graduated from law school, I went to work in management consulting, even though I didn't really know much about that. And I jumped from management consulting to tech back in 2000. So a bit of a risk taker. I think you need that if you want to become an entrepreneur, but definitely not one of those guys who, could never see himself working for other people, right? There are some people who are just, entrepreneurs at heart. All they want to do is build companies, right? They can't even think of themselves working for someone else. I'm definitely not like that. I was working, as you said, in different roles in a few different companies, and then really kind of an opportunity, I would say, came my way in that there was a guy who worked for me, a young engineer, and we both saw an opportunity that was related to the company that we were at, and kind of a need in the market that wasn't being filled. And he's much more of a natural entrepreneur than I am, and he really kind of pushed me to make the jump. And so he really convinced me, right? I think if you kind of played my life out, 10 times, probably, 8 of them, I wouldn't end up starting my own company. But, I am, a risk taker inherently, and kind of, what we saw this opportunity. And I also think a lot has to do with the market in Israel, right? So in Israel, there's no such thing really, at least not that I'm aware of, right? Of, someone who makes, I don't know, $500,000 a year in a regular corporate job, right? Where, in America, as you work your way up, right? If you become a VP at whatever, Google, I don't know, whatever company, right? Or SVP, right? You start to really make some serious money, or like at Oracle, which, where I ended up working kind of later on in my career. But in Israel, it doesn't really exist. I'd say so the risk isn't as big, right? It kind of like, I kind of maxed out in salary here, right? Like if you're already reporting to the CEO, so like, and the CEO's only making, 5,000 shekels or more a month than you are or whatever, right? And especially here, when if you get a 5,000 shekel a month raise, you end up taking home like 2,000 shekels, right? So the risk is not as big, right? And kind of the jump is not as big, right? It's not like going from, again, making, having a $500,000 a year job, and suddenly you're making whatever, $50,000 a year, right? You're not making that leap. So those are kind of the conditions that kind of, came together that led me to start.
And when you talk about being a risk taker, so obviously entrepreneurship is a very risky business. So did you go in, knowing the general stats and knowing the prospects of, something actually really big becoming of the startup that you decided to start?
I didn't really think about that much, right? We kind of got excited about the idea. We started working on it. We started talking to investors, and you kind of don't really think so much. If you think about the stats, right? If you think about the stats, then you're not in the right place, right? That because you, by definition, to be an entrepreneur, you have to be an optimist, right? You have to believe in something that seems unlikely. So yeah, I would say I was able to kind of block that out, and you kind of, focus on the people who succeed, and, you hope that you'll be one of them. But I think, again, if you're talking about the stats, then you're lost. You may stay at your day job, I would say.
That's why I'm not an entrepreneur, I guess. Okay. And so this was your first company, and you did end up getting acquired, also known as an exit. So maybe tell us a little bit about how that works. What exactly is an exit entail for those of us who haven't actually been through that process?
Yeah, so an exit, can come in one of two forms, really, right? So one is an IPO, which is, you're actually, go public on a stock exchange, which is much less common, right? And only for, really, really big companies. Although your father and I did have an IPO at Ringo, which is, okay, a whole story in itself.
We're not going to get into the history with the Dallas Mavericks owner right now.
Right. So that's for another day, but it's not rare exceptions, right? An IPO is really, for, billion-dollar companies. But the most common exit for, certainly for Israeli technology companies is to be acquired by a bigger company. And they basically, you're swallowed up. They acquire all the stock of the company. They take the employees, they take the technology, they take everything. Usually there'll be, pretty much always, there will be some incentive for people to stay, both kind of the employees and the founders. The employees will usually be giving incentive plans, options, or other kinds of bonuses if they stay. And the founders, in our case, a lot of times won't get, the founders who already own a lot of stock in the company, generally you won't get all the money up front to wait. So you have to stay, because obviously they want the people to stay. Sometimes there's something called an earnout, where actually the amount of money depends on how the company does with the acquirer. That's something you want to avoid, because once you're in, once you're a part of someone else's company, right, there's a lot of things that can go wrong, that, where you might not, meet those milestones. So we didn't have that, but we did have kind of what's called a holdback. And so, yeah, so basically, companies will, either you can go out and try to find buyers, or companies will express interest in acquiring you. Usually you'll, want to run some sort of process, because, you'll want to have competing offers. So a lot of times companies hire investment bankers. That's what we did. So, we were in a situation where Oracle, which was one of our customers, was looking to make an acquisition in our space. And, we thought we had a good chance of being acquired by them. And so we hired an investment banker to kind of scan the market and see, were there other potential buyers, to create some competition. And then companies submit offers. You sign what's called an LOI, or a term sheet. And then there's a whole long due diligence process. So kind of you accept their offer, but the deal's not close to being done at that point, right? Then they start to dig in, right, to see, is everything you told them true, right? And, they rip apart, your financials, your technology, your IP, all your customer relationships, et cetera. And then kind of, the deal, basically, when you sign a definitive deal, that process is long. It can take, but for us, it took several months, actually, several stressful months, actually.
Okay, so you have this exit under your belt. It's basically the equivalent of like hitting a major grand slam in the world of startups. And so what do you do from there? What's your next step after this period where you're sort of still serving the acquiring company, but after that's over, so you're on the other side of this tremendous success, what do you do from there?
Yeah, so it's funny. I think one of my partners said it well. He said, you work, you build a company so that you can sell it, right? That's what everyone wants to do. And so then you can kind of do what you want. And then you realize what you like doing is being founder of a tech company. So a lot of people, I think it's very common for people to try to do it again, right? Because, again, it's fun, it's exciting, right? Especially when it works, right? When it doesn't work, it's less fun. So, I was, again, some people, there are people that, they call serial entrepreneurs. You've heard that term, right? There's some people who are just, they have 20 ideas, and like they're off and it's starting a new company, right? The day they leave, they're the last one, right? that acquired them. That's, I'm definitely not like that. A lot of those people are the, real tech visionaries, which I kind of took a year where I kind of did, I said, called consulting. So I was, doing, working part-time for this company, part-time for that company. I was on some boards. I did not enjoy at all. I didn't get any sort of like CPOC from that because, you're a little bit involved here, a little bit involved there. You don't really own anything. And so I was looking for, to try it again. But again, my previous company, again, the idea came to me like from the work I had been doing. And I didn't have that situation again. And so I ended up joining up with also a young kind of technical founder who had already started a company, but was very, very small. And it was one of those kinds of situations where, almost like in Shidduchim, sometimes like everything comes together. Oh, this one knows that one. It was like that. Like a lot of, and so it seemed like a good match. And it was a very, very early stage company, but it ended up not being such a great match. Kind of, so we my partner and I, we really kind of had different visions kind of as we got to getting into the company. And so there was a struggle, that was for sure. And yeah, that kind of, went on for a couple of years, and really, really took a lot out of me and made me kind of, I guess, reconsider. So that's kind of, that's how things played out for me. Was that again, I wanted to do it all over again, but it didn't really happen kind of the way I envisioned, and kind of left me a little bit at a crossroads, kind of after having been through kind of a much less successful circumstance, and kind of, not being sure what I wanted to do after that.
And when we were speaking before, you used the term burnout to describe that experience. Is that true? Can you tell us a little more about what burnout meant to you in that reality?
Yeah, for me, burnout was, really kind of having lost my joy and my cheshek kind of, for what I was doing, kind of more generally, not just kind of in the particular circumstance that I was in, but I was looking at other opportunities. I had an offer to be like going as a CEO somewhere, and like I just wasn't feeling it. Right? I was kind of like, I can't. It's hard. I mean, right? A startup is hard, right? You have to convince people, right? You convince investors, right? You're selling all the time, right? But not just right, something new. You're selling to investors. You're selling to customers, right? It's very, very. It's draining, in that, when things are going well, it's great, right? But the kind of the work to get there, and I think in my first company, we were a little bit spoiled. Again, things went relatively quickly there, and it just, we identified like a clear market need. It was like obvious that no one else had identified, and companies actually ended up copying us, like, to that extent. So like we really kind of hit the nail on the head there, but it's usually not always like that, right? And it's a grind, and I just couldn't. I was burned out from it. Like, I can't see myself giving it my all to do this again. And kind of, I wasn't real. And if you're not giving it your all, right, it's not gonna happen, right? It's not gonna work. And so I was conflicted about what to do, right? I mean, part of me was just like, you got to suck it up and just, whatever, get past it. But, the other part of me was like, maybe it's time to, like, look at something else, doing something completely different. So that's kind of what was going through my head. But it's hard. It was depressing because if you're spending a lot of time in your work and you're not feeling like any CPOC from it, right? It's terrible, right? Because, I mean, you spend a lot of time at work, right? Even though, like, we as Jews don't get our meaning from our work, right? I mean, some guy, their whole life is in their work, right? And that's terrible, right? But at the end of the day, even if you have everything else, your family, you're learning everything, right? Still, if you're spending 10 hours a day on something, you're not getting any CPOC from it. It's really not good. It affects everything about you. So I was looking for a change.
Looking back in hindsight on that, call it a failure, are there any signs on the wall that you could have seen that you missed, or anything that you might have done differently if you had a chance to do it again?
Yeah, the structure that we had in place was terrible, and was set up to fail in retrospect. Again, without getting too much into details, that's one thing I knew I was never going to get in a situation like that, where kind of it wasn't clear, decision making kind of structure was not clear, right? In my first company, I was the CEO. I had two co-founders who were equal owners of the company, but it was very clear. The role definition was very, very clear, right? And like, again, when a decision had to be made, sometimes like it was my decision. That was it. And like everyone understood that, and we're all on board. It has to be like that. Here, that was not so clear. And again, I was much older than my partner, and kind of had a lot different experience. And so, there was, it was kind of like, I guess, getting married to someone without dating, or, going on one date and suddenly you're like, wow. So that was, there needs to be a very clear organizational structure. And when that's not the case, and especially, when the different parties have different expectations, it's bad. So it was probably doomed to failure, kind of in retrospect. So I learned a lot from that. So I knew I wasn't going to put myself in a situation like that again. Like, that was obvious, and I learned a lot there. But it made me rethink whether I wanted to do this again at all. So I guess that was a good thing.
That's a really interesting point. And it almost reminds me of like a dynamic which I have seen sometimes in maybe, nonprofits, small organizations, community structures like shuls or schools or stuff like that, where there's a lot of stress involved, and some of it can be traced back to maybe the lack of clear roles or decision-making structure. Is that a good take?
Yeah, I think it's a great take. And when there's no clarity around that, and people don't understand their roles, and right, and people are like, how come they're not listening to me? And why is it that person's decision? Or whose decision is it? That leads to conflict. Again, when things aren't going well. If things are going well, it's great, it's hunky-dory, right? But like, sometimes things aren't going well. Or, and when people are butting heads like that, and it's not clear who the leader is or why that person is the leader, right? And again, if there's different camps, again, it was complicated. We had investors. The investors were kind of, people who had invested in my previous company. So it was a mess. It was just, again, if things had gone well, like if the product worked the way it should and the customers came on, it would have been great. But obviously that wasn't the case. We struggled finding the right, what's called product market fit. And again, there was a lot of conflict. And so, yeah, I think that's true in any organization. Kind of role definition is critical. Otherwise, again, it's chaos.
Okay, so we talked about your transition to being an entrepreneur. We talked about your exit and the challenges that it came with it. So what was next? What do you do next now that you're in this sort of sticky burnout situation in this part of your life?
Yeah, so I kind of said to myself, I'd been giving shiurim over the years, and people told me I'd be a good teacher. And I'm very good friends with a guy named Barak Saffer. Rebbe Barak Saffer was a Rebbe at Mevasseret. We have actually been learning together in Echabura for about 15 years. And kind of like almost as a joke, but for me it was serious. I was like, what about me becoming a Rebbe at Mevasseret? And he got excited about it. I mean, he's I don't know if you know him, but he gets excited easily. But he got excited about it, and again, we're very close. And he spoke to the Rosh Yeshiva, who also kind of is lives in Ramat Beit Shemesh and is a neighbor of mine, so also knows someone else I know. And yeah, it kind of came together. Again, the yeshiva is a growing yeshiva, so that was that was critical, right? A lot of yeshivas have very little turnover in staff, but here the yeshiva was growing, and it seemed like there was a good fit for a role for me, and it kind of came together. Really, like, it wasn't planned at all, right? It's not something, it was kind of, it's one of those things. Like, it's like one day I was like, I need a change, and I brought this up, and suddenly it spiraled, and then it became a reality. So that's kind of how that came together.
So now you're a full-time Rebbe in yeshiva, but you were in the business world for so many years. So we talk a little bit more about what you did to stay immersed enough in learning that you're able to step up into that role. Because I'm assuming you're not just like going there to talk about startups with the guys, right?
So I mean, it was very critical to me, to be a real Rebbe there and to really be teaching Torah, not to just, be like a novelty item. And our yeshiva is like a serious yeshiva. I mean, there's different levels of guys, but like, the guys that I'm working with are like, kind of the, upper level guys in Shana Bed. It's real serious learning there. So I think a couple of things. So I kept learning even out of yeshiva. So I went to Shalavim, I went to YU, I was in a Rosenzweig shir. I did a year in Gross, and then I went out to work, went to law school, went to work. But I really stayed learning like at a high and I think that came from one, again, learning Iyun, like as I was part of a chabura. Our mutual friend Dr. Lavi was my chabrusa. We had Marakomos and Shir twice a week, like a real, high level in Chabura. I think that's one thing that really helped me. The other thing is that, I was kind of mechayev myself a little bit. I gave a Shir in Ramat Beit Shemesh for many years, like also like, an Iyun. It was like Iyun usually on halakhic topics, but like Iyun Shabbos, and then, we did like Yerodea and kind of, and like, I took a lot of the stuff. I love Rebbe Sobolovsky. I listened to all of his shiurim, like when he taught, Shabbos and YU, not just, 15-minute, the things that he gives. Like, so even I looked stuff up, I wrote it up. I add some of my own stuff, but, so I was able to keep up like a high level of learning. I think, that was really important for me so that, when I came to yeshiva, and I'm sure that some of the other Rebbeim there, they would never say this. They probably were skeptical, the ones who didn't know me, and I don't blame them, right? Because it was this guy. But like that, I was able to earn the respect, I think, of the other Rebbeim, and the Talmidim is again, nothing, not even close. Obviously, not even like up to the the shoelaces of some of the people we've had on this podcast, right? But for a Rebbe in American Yeshiva to be like at a decent level where the guys can say, okay, this guy knows something. So I think that's what really helped me kind of be able to go in and now, be able to hawk with the guys and all the lumdus and stuff like that, was that I really kept that up over the years.
That's interesting. And as far as you mentioned, like the relationship with the guys, so I could hear that coming from the business world into the Rebbe role could have a tremendous advantage that you actually have a lot more experience and know what most of these other guys are heading to. On the other hand, there is something to be said for the pure Rebbe who's been, Rosh Berubo or Rosh Vakulo in the Gemara for his entire life. So how did that dynamic play out for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I think there's pluses and minuses, right? I think, some of the Rebbeim as, the guys who have just been plugging away all these years as like a demus for the guys to emulate as like an ideal. I definitely don't have that. Funny stories of like, things that happen like in, business world and stuff like that. But there's, some of these guys just been pounding it. And so that's really chashuv and obviously, very important for the guys to get. And they don't get that from me. I think the other Rebbeim, I feel like, a lot of them are much broader than I am. Like for me, like, okay, I focused on like Gemara and halacha, like I give like bread and butter, but like, if I had to give like a machshava shir, like a 45, now someone said, like, tomorrow you're giving an hour machshava shir, I like wouldn't know what to do, right? Or like, it's just, with some of the other games, like incredible, right? They also like can give a nefesh chaim shir and this year and that year and a 2 in an hour parsha shir. I don't have that. But I think on the plus side though, right? I have some credibility in terms of issues that the guys are facing that some of the other so I think it's a nice balance. Like I wouldn't start a yeshiva with all guys like like me, right? Guys who are 50 who haven't been into chinuch, but I hope that I bring something to the yeshiva that's a little bit different, and that's helpful. I would say I think the other thing area that I really am not able to help the guys, and where the other is, although Rebbeim and that people have been Rebbeim for a long time, they have Talmidim and they see how they did what they want to hear. Either, if someone comes to me, should I go to this year or that year? In YU next year, I have no idea, right? I don't have any experience there, but I am able to give them something that the other Rebbeim I think aren't. So that's a good balance.
Yeah, I think one of the things that drove me to start this podcast is because as much as I appreciated the wonderful resources of Rebbeim that I had, I did feel that they were really on the ball in helping you within the yeshiva framework. But then once you're beyond those confines, so then their experience is less relevant and less valuable. and I really wanted to have that balance. So it's interesting that you guys have that in Yeshiva, where guys have the resource to speak to you. So maybe tell us a little bit about some of like the main things that you tell them when it comes to preparing for life outside of Yeshiva and what that entails, because it's a very, very different world out there.
Yeah. So I think a few things to me are critical. To me, the most important thing, like the number one thing, is Chevra, as where you decide to live. To me, that's the number one thing, where you decide to live. And then within that, who are your chaverim going to be? That is so critical. I mean, I saw it in my own life. When I lived in Cambridge for 3 years, I had a significant Eureka in my learning. Like that was just, because who was there? No one, right? A couple guys, right? And then, I moved to Passaic, after I finished law school. Wow, that had a massive impact on me. And then I moved to Ramat Beit Shemesh also, right? A massive impact. And so you have to assume, I think you have to assume that you're going to be like the average guy in the place that you live, right? So like, what does that person look like, right? Of course, there's always exceptions, right? But I think you always have to assume that, right? So that also with kind of your kids, like assume your kid's going to be like the average kid that comes out of that school, right? Whatever that school is, right? Like you might not be that way, right? But that's probably how it's going to be. So, I think those decisions are critical. And then kind of within you, whatever community you choose, right? Your friends. So I like the chevra that I have is like such an impact on me, as mechayev me and my learning. And so that's the most important thing. Obviously, and who you marry, right, is also, that goes together with that, obviously. But in terms of, the choices that you make, I think that's really critical. And I think, at work itself, I think it's really important to have proper gedarim. I found myself always, it's a big challenge to, on the one hand, you want to be one of the guys, right, at work, right? You don't, the work is a social place, and you want to, get promoted, and but I think it's critical to keep real serious gedarim. I always stayed away from any like social interaction outside of work. I think that's really important. If you're single, it's like you heard about Yavor, I think, right? But when you're married, it's important to. So I always try to be, one of the crew in the office, right, and be friendly and social, but never to join in activities outside of work. I think that's a critical gather. And again, the earlier, with all things, the earlier you set it, the easier it is, right? Like kind of once you set it, that's it, it's done, right? And everyone knows you, and everyone respects you. I think it doesn't care, right? It's much harder once you start, right? Or you give it a little, right? It's much harder to kind of to change that. So I think, that's one of the things I talk to the guys. I actually give like a little shir on kind of workplace halacha, and again, different gedarim, and there's halakhic issues of yichud, etc., and all kinds of things, shaking hands with women. But like the most important thing, again, aside from the particular halakhic aspects, is to really, I think, make strong gedarim and like make it clear you're different, right? We're different. That's it, right? And like and sometimes I think a mistake people make a lot. I've made this mistake many times, is you want to do something because you think someone else will feel bad, right? If I don't, they're gonna feel bad if I don't, whatever, shake their hand, right? If I don't do this, but it's usually not true. Sometimes it's true, but in most of the cases, it's you feel weird, right? And like, okay, that's what's demanded of us, right? And you have to be honest about that. And so, okay, sometimes you feel a little awkward. Okay, we're not supposed to feel 100. We're not supposed to feel like one of the guys, right? With at work, that's not our place. So that's something I tried to kind of drill into the guys, is that, and to spend as much time as they can learning, right? Not to be in a rush. Again, that's I'm, when I was a kid, and even now we see, right, Shana Bet, your parents don't want to let you go, right? Or, now, Baruch Hashem, it's much more accepted, but we don't have to be in such a rush, right? The more years you spend, building the base, right? At the end of the day, like, if you don't have a good base, right, then you're toast, right? You're not going to be able to come down with Chacham while you're working, right? If you you spent several years learning, right, with the Rebbe, okay, then you have a chance, right? Uh, so that's obviously I tried to drill that in as well.
So you mentioned the chevra, you mentioned gedarim, and you mentioned focusing on learning. Just to go back to the chevra point for 1 second, it's certainly something which when I was in yeshiva, I felt very, very strongly the impact, the wonderful chevra that I had in Karen Biavna had an unbelievable impact on me, and really is a huge part of who I became. But then now I'm thinking about it as like I transition out, it's a very different role of the chevra, because like most of your day is at work, and then most of your out of work time is probably with your family and your kids. But hopefully everyone is okay to start a family, and that's a very draining. So there is a chevra, but it's a very, very small slice of your actual day. So it's a little bit of a different role in that next stage of life, right?
Yeah, obviously it's a different role. It's a lesser role, but in some ways, it's a more important role, right? Because the question is, right, what are you going to do with that, hour and a half, right? That's not filled with those other responsibilities, right? And there, I just think, right, it's easy to find stuff to fill the time with, right? And I think there is where, your evra is really critical, right? What's going to be in that time, right? Are you going to go to the Beis Medrash and there are going to be people there, right? Or are they going to be empty, right? Is there going to be, again, a feeling of kabura, right? Where, there's give and take, right? It's much more enjoyable where there's, gishmak and evra and as opposed to, showing up by yourself or you're sitting at home, right? Because when you're sitting at home, again, listen, it's good to have, I started learning Daf Yomi after I sold my company. That was a company I took on. And that's great. It's B'chayev, and I just do it at home by myself, whatever I had the time. Okay. But I think, the role, you're right. You spend less time, obviously, with your friends, but they can still have an outsized impact. And so I think it's really, really important. Again, I think people don't realize that. Say, oh, move here, move there. Like, but, it's more convenient for me to live here. It's closer to my office, whatever, but like that could be a terrible decision, right? Because again, like, I think you're really influenced, but that's how we are, right? We're people, we're influenced by our environment, right? And if you're not going to be, again, maybe there's always exceptions, right? There's always, but again, you should never assume you're going to be an exception.
Right. And to drill down a little deeper on the third thing that you said about not rushing and building that base in yeshiva. So it's obviously true that the more you can learn, the better, and the more base you can build when you're younger is obviously a great advantage on the one hand. On the other hand, there is a trap, which we discussed a little bit on this podcast in different forums, which is the fact that if you grow accustomed to thinking that yeshiva is real life, or this is how it really is supposed to be done, and then for 30, 40 years, you feel like you're in some sort of b'diavad situation. Oh, that was really how it's supposed to be done. And what I'm really doing now is like second rate or third rate. So that's not a healthy feeling either. So how do you suggest guys in yeshiva or beyond yeshiva navigate that and making sure that even though it's great to learn when you're young, it's great to devote yourself as much as you can, but that doesn't mean that when you're out there doing your thing professionally and making it work and learning as much as you can, that you don't feel bad about it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think in our community, that's less of an issue, right? I think in our community, we err more, when I say, I'll call it the, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, the YU community, or, I don't know exactly, or the Dati Lumi community, that's probably less of an issue, right? I would think, more, we'll find more, certainly in our yeshiva, right, is guys rushing out. Certainly in the Haredi community in Israel, I think what you're discussing, obviously very, very, significant issue, right?
I mean, I don't know. I think even guys who like learn well in these yeshivas that you're describing, they can feel like, well, I learn well because that's like real learning when I'm in yeshiva, but now like I don't have access to that. So even though they don't feel like anything like puzzle about working, but they do feel that their world of learning was real and true and genuine in yeshiva, and now they just don't have access to it.
Right. Yeah. So I think, you have to, I mean, it's not true, right? And especially today, it's not true, right? Where you have access to everything. You have access to everything that every yeshiva guy has, right? You can be in your Rebbe's shir, right? Literally. The Marmakomos, right? You can be there. You can listen to this year. You can email him questions. You can WhatsApp him questions, right? So I think, today it's completely untrue. And yeah, I think, it's critical for Rebbeim. Again, it's a delicate balance. I think what you're saying is a delicate balance. Like, we have like, for example, the something that we deal with in yeshiva and Shana Bet, Some guys want to go home in January, right? Or their parents want them to come home in January. And like, it's a very delicate balance. So on the one hand, I think it's better for them to stay more, right? But on the other hand, if you tell them, like, listen, if you go to YU, right, you're going to be overwhelmed right, and you're going to have all the schoolwork and you go in the middle of the year and you're going to flounder, right? That's like a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So I think you're right about the balance. So it's a challenge for Rebbe, right, to kind of, on the one hand, make sure people stay in yeshiva as long as they can, right, because that's critical, certainly up to a certain point, but not to feel that, what they're doing outside of that is not important, right, and not to feel, as you said, that, okay, my learning stops here, right? Again, I think something I guess, okay to achieve. Like, my level of learning today is much higher than it was when I left yeshiva, right? So, and I have a lot of candid like that also, right? So it's definitely achievable. I don't know, I guess I need a little more experience in chinuch to figure out how to manage that balance. I see it as a challenge, and I'm not sure I have a great answer for it, but it's a point to be sensitive to as a mechanech. I think you're 100% right. Like, it's a difficult balance. But again, I find that in our community, the balance is tilted more towards kind of leaving yeshiva a little too early. So, that's what I think we need to.
Got it. Okay. So just to reflect back on this entire conversation, and there's been a lot of really interesting, a lot of fascinating insights. Obviously, all of life is a combination of our hishtadlus and HaKadosh Baruch Hu siyata d'shmaya, and you seem to have put in a lot of hard work at different points in your career and in your learning, and you also had a lot of siyata d'shmaya that, gave you the hatzlacha in the business world and nudged you back into the Beis Medrash at this stage. So I wonder if you could just reflect back on that, and if you have any other advice for people who are trying to gain that right and fine line of putting in their efforts and doing their stylist, but also knowing that HaKadosh Baruch Hu runs the world and he's going to make sure that I end up in the right place.
Yeah. I mean, that's always, I've been zocheh to see a lot of tremendous hashgacha in my life. Like I said, the fact that, someone once asked me, he's like, I want to plan things out so like I can work and then make some money and then like go into chinuch when I'm 40. I'm like, you can't plan that, right? It happened to me. It's a miracle, right? Mama's a miracle, right? And again, like even starting my company was like, again, circumstances came, right? And like we almost went out of business. Like we had like our main data supplier shut off our data, and we basically were totally messed over and like almost I had to close the company. And and we found a solution, right? It was so. I think you need to. You can't plan too much, right? You have to, make decisions that make sense in the moment, right? And try to look forward. But at the end of the day, recognize that it's Hashem's hands, and not to get too stressed out, and not to worry what's going to be in 20 years. I think you make decisions in the moment based on the best information you have, and getting eitzah from people. And kind of with that recognition. Again, it's always a hard balance, right? And again, if anyone had the exact right answer for that, they'd have their door, people would be lined up to talk to them. But you're right. I mean, it's a balance, and you need to keep the recognition of both. But I can say without a doubt that, and I think most people that I've been zocheh to see kind of the end of Hashem in my career, which kind of, again, what is completely unpredictable, I would say.
Okay, Steve Glanz, this is a lot of fun. Thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Have a good one.
That's our show for today. If you enjoy Shark Tank and want to help us grow the show, make sure that you hit subscribe, leave a 5-star review, and share this episode with a few friends. Until next time, keep on steiging, Chevra.